Okay, John, come on up. You can have the seat. Water if we need it. So here we go. Everybody good? Okay, so whoops, that's fine. Okay, so welcome back from lunch. Looks like we lost some people and they're taking a nap, which is okay. Maybe next year I'll do this right after lunch so we can be our guinea pigs. So again, congratulations on winning the 2025 Cornell Entrepreneur Year. I mean, it really is a big honor. You probably looked at the list of people. By the way, the first honoree for Entrepreneur of the Year was Sandy Weil, the founder of Citigroup. Can you guys close those doors? Or else tell those people to come in? Thanks. If the list goes on and on, there's been some fantastic entrepreneurs that have won this award. And I was so delighted that you won this year. So it's interesting, I extended us by 15 minutes, by the way, so we have a whole hour, which you might take. So start thinking about your questions now, and feel free. We have our microphone folks that can run you the mics. But you were at Cornell from 98 to 2002. A lot of the adults obviously know what that meant. So it meant internet bubble and then crash. So you got to do both the bubble and the burst, which is unusual. The students in the room probably don't understand what that means, but that's okay because they've heard about it at least. You were at Cornell then you went to MIT for a master's and a PhD, and I'm guessing you had some academic aspirations. Is that true?
Yeah, I think in kind of to your point, when I was here as an undergrad at Cornell, I did one of the co-op programs. Which is one of those opportunities where you get to work for a semester and then another summer. And I actually ended up doing my co-op with Cisco Systems.
Oh, yeah, hold on. What turn is on?
I did not. Can you, is that okay?
It's just the tech guy who can't turn his mic on. Right, okay.
Apologies.
It's okay.
Yeah, so sorry, I was saying for folks that didn't hear, I did a co-op program when I was here. I actually worked for Cisco Systems at the time and showed up in the semester that I was working there was when I'm gonna date myself, but it was it was at the ramp up and the .com, everybody was the most optimistic they could be about technology and the internet and the first kind of wave of it. And I got to see what that was like. And then man, that semester when I came back was when everything went crazy of that time in the dot-com up. So I went back for the summer, and I mean, the crazy thing about being there at the time, I was one of 2 interns in all of engineering for Cisco, and they were, I don't know, probably 20 or 30,000 people. That's how much they had cut back on the program.
Are you serious? They only had 2 interns? In
the engineering group I was in. They had a lot more in some of the other programs, but it was basically like they had cut back pretty strongly. So it was very, and now I look back and say it was one of the most educational experiences I could have had, just to see how people react, to see when things, I saw people at their most optimistic and then saw people at their most pessimistic in the span of 6 months. And then also you get to see how the leaders react that are in positions where they're having to make very hard decisions and stuff like that. I couldn't articulate that at the time, and it was very difficult and stressful to go through, but incredible for me to actually just internalize some of that stuff. And to your point, when I came back, those companies that everybody was going out in the Bay Area weren't having jobs for folks. So I started working with a lot of professors because I was really interested in, actually, I still wanted to do technology stuff. I wanted to have a big impact. And the next way I thought I could do that was through research. So started doing more academic research, and that's when I applied to grad school and ended up going to MIT, just because honestly, kind of a lot of folks were in that boat because there weren't as many jobs going around as there were the year before.
And I should have asked you, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Yeah, I grew up in Edmond, Oklahoma. Okay. So kind of was super fortunate to get into Cornell and really excited kind of, to see what it was like.
So you're the typical Plains person from middle of the country, technology wizard.
Yeah,
I can't imagine were there a lot of you there?
No,
So I'm not trying to be politically incorrect. I'm just thinking about this. Usually I would expect, oh yeah, I'm from New York or from Boston or.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, and honestly, so most of my family was in ranching and farming. So my grandfather was a rancher. That was actually kind of my first exposure to a lot of technology stuff, which is actually, you have land, you're trying to either bale hay or grow crops. And then, how do you kind of augment that with machinery and other stuff to get stuff done? So that was kind of my first exposure. And then when I was in high school, I started discovering computers, and I knew immediately I wanted to do something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so for me, I felt incredibly, lucky once I got into Cornell to be able to come here and, study with top minds.
That's fantastic. And while you're at MIT, you met your two co-founders of your first company. Is that
That's right. Yeah.
How did you meet them?
So one of them, Sanjay, who I've worked with for nearly 20 years now, we were both PhD students and started in the same year and ended up working in the same lab. We started working together on a couple projects and found that like we kind of matched just in terms of like our interests and kind of things, and then had a lot of kind of complementary skills that ended up, we loved kind of working together, loved working with other people, and that was initially like where
So
we met.
there was no co-founder dating app or anything like that. It was all real time.
No, it was definitely real time.
Time.
Yeah, it was, and I think we, and I was talking to someone right before this, they were actually asking about similar stuff, like how do you find
Yeah,
co-founders?
they always do.
And I do think it was really interesting just having, I never really thought myself as an entrepreneur. What I always did like doing was projects, and it might be a project on the side, maybe part of a class project. It might be an idea that I had. I just wanted to like try something out. Now looking back, I'm like, oh, I think those were like just practice runs, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that was actually how I met Sanjit, was we were talking about research ideas all the time. And we like doing that, like talking about that stuff outside of lab, and that led to, just, additional ideas. And then we kicked off a couple of projects, and that's what ended up turning in. We started working together on a research project that had to do with wireless, and that's actually how that turned into the first company, Meraki.
So the first company is Meraki. We'll get into the naming thing later about how you guys picked these cool names. But tell us what Meraki, like what was the foundational goal of Meraki?
Yeah, definitely.
Again, the time frame was 2023-ish. I'm sorry, 2003-ish.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I think we ended up starting the company actually in 2006. And again, this is like, and for all the folks that might have a hard time imagining, this was like before the internet was like pervasive.
Yep.
Before Wi-Fi was everywhere. We were working on Wi-Fi systems at that time though, when it wasn't huge. We had, our research was on experimental wireless networks. We built a big outdoor Wi-Fi network in Cambridge. And we would go to grad students and kind of do a deal with them where we'd say, like, we have this equipment, we'll basically go install a Wi-Fi dish on your house, and we will trade you. You guys get free internet, which at the time, everybody kind of was on the forefront of that and realized that they needed it. And the trade was, at night, we would run experiments on the wireless network. So we would understand, if one of these devices sent out a packet, who received it. We would do a bunch of really interesting measurement studies, and then start doing experimental stuff to run different protocols and understand how they worked in the real world settings. So this was kind of like a prototype, if that makes sense. We got a lot of practice and exposure to like.
But this is, you didn't think about starting a company then. This is just research.
It was just research.
Okay.
And we just thought it would be really interesting. And what ended up happening was all this stuff was very applied. And so we started discovering differences between what everybody had thought networks would be like when they built these. And then when we actually did the measurements, it turns out like the world is a much more messy and complex place. And we were using those learnings to go back and build new protocols that actually like did better in reality than a lot of the theoretical models that folks had for Wi-Fi. So that was, we were really excited to do that and kept trying to build a bigger and bigger network, if that makes sense. But at some point, we started scaling that out and actually seeing that there were a couple other use cases where we could build additional networks. We ended up partnering actually with a lot of folks that were trying to bring internet access to like apartment complexes and places locally where folks might not have internet or might not be able to afford like connections to every house. So we were kind of running these where we went from one wireless network to we started working with other organizations to build out their own. And that was the like kind of beginning, if that makes sense, of the turning this into a package that other people could buy and deploy for themselves.
So it sounds like, and we'll get into the company a bit, but it almost sounds like Meraki enabled wireless internet for the normal consumer.
You know, and yeah,
Is that fair?
well, and you know, the way I would describe it was all the stuff that we were working on for this research stuff
Yep.
ended up being when Wi-Fi went from being something where there was a single access point in a conference room to today, there's like an expectation that it's every inch of a carpeted building, like any of the buildings here on campus, has Wi-Fi everywhere. You're gonna, instead of just deploying one, which a person could go out and manually configure, what we had been doing for the research became very valuable to figure out how to automatically configure and deploy these systems so that like a smaller staff of people could do it. And you can deploy thousands of access points relatively quickly. So that is where the valuable piece that we ended up finding. And in some sense, I think the process that we went, we kind of did have we had a technology, we had this hammer. We were looking for a nail, and it was incredibly difficult to bridge that gap.
So I want to just go off script a little bit like I always do. So Rob Ryan, some of you know Rob Ryan. He's also a Cornellian, also a Cornell Entrepreneur of the Year. Have you ever heard of Rob Ryan?
Yeah.
So Rob founded a company called Ascend Communications, which he sold to Lucent in like 1998 or 9 for like $28 billion. I'm not exaggerating the number on that one. So that was internet bubble hype time. But Rob was it was a hardware company. And it sounds like this is kind of cool, like Cornell has kind of got the corner on this market where Rob always claims that he enabled the internet. That's a little, I mean, Rob likes to exaggerate. For any of you who've met him. And it sounds like Meraki enabled wireless access. I mean, that's pretty cool. I just kind of put 2 and 2 together. So have you ever talked to Rob?
I've never talked to him, but I mean, it's one of these things. I certainly am a student of history.
I could
right?
definitely introduce you.
Oh, cool.
Like after you won, by the way, I emailed him and I said something along the lines I just mentioned, like, you know, hey, Rob, Meraki, you're the co-founder of Meraki just won. And he's like, oh, you're like, you know, tell him I'm better. Like, whatever. He's something, like, whatever. So it's just kind of funny, but I could definitely introduce you. He has a ranch out in Montana. It's a fun place to visit. You might enjoy that. So, okay. So you did this cool research. You got this wireless networks working at scale. Why did you start a company? Like what happened that enabled you guys to say, oh, let's start a company?
Yeah, definitely. So I think at the time we didn't, we ended up starting the company basically because we had this project. We were making these like wireless routers at the time, and able to actually go to the next step and start manufacturing them and selling them. We had to start a company. If that makes sense.
It does, but you had to take a step back from academia to do that.
Yes.
Did something happen that enabled that, like that easy transition?
Yeah, and this is kind of a funny story. There was like a series of about 5 things that all kind of like lined up for us that ended up, the professor we were working for at MIT, his name is Robert Morris, an incredibly smart guy. He himself had a background in doing startups and things like that, but he came to us probably the spring when we had been building up this wireless network, and he told us, he was like, hey guys, and he told both me and Sanjay, he was like, I'm going to be, by the way, my wife is going to do a sabbatical. They were going to move outside of the country for a little bit. And he said, just to set expectations, I'll be gone for the next year. You guys can continue to do your research. If you need to TA, you can do that, whatever else you need to do. But I won't be answering emails for the next year. And Sanjay and I kind of looked at each other a little bit because we were like, I don't understand. Like you'll be unavailable. And he was like, yeah. He's like, you'll still get your, grad student stipend and it'll all be okay, but don't plan on getting anything productive done.
It's almost like he's telling you like, you're going to waste a year of your PhD time?
Kind of, that's what I think we started to internalize.
Okay.
So that happened.
Which is a big deal.
It was a big deal. And so, and to give some perspective, we had gotten all the way, we had finished our master's thesis. We had worked on the proposals for our PhD and gotten those like right up to the finish line. So we thought we were about a year away from graduating, if that makes sense. So we were kind of like, wow, about a year away, what are we going to do? And I think at the same time, we had actually, we had this kind of project for the research stuff we were working on. We were trying to build bigger and bigger networks. We had actually been, just trying to figure out every lever we could pull. We had ended up, we were going out, we were buying routers at that time at, just a Wi-Fi access point from Best Buy. We were flashing them on our own software, and then we would take those and deploy them. That worked. It was just like relatively expensive. We had figured out a way about at the same time to get them manufactured en masse and flash our own software, because there were some folks that were funding a bunch of research at MIT that knew folks that actually built the devices like in Taiwan. So Sanjit actually had taken a trip out to do that, and they basically were like, hey, we told them about the research we were doing.
Like
They thought it was cool.
took a trip to Taiwan.
Yes, took a trip
Okay.
to Taiwan with several other professors, and I'm sure a lot of professors here do like
Yep.
for funding trips. But they thought what we were doing was cool, and we're like, hey, this sounds great. If you guys ever want to do a larger run, like of a couple thousand devices, let us know. And we said, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. And they were like, it's great. And then they were like, the initial order size is, I think we had to order a couple thousand. And we just went through and did the math, and we were like, oh man, that is like several $100,000 that we as grad students did not have any access to, if that makes sense.
By the way, it does make sense.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
no, they totally makes sense. And at that time, actually, there was another, we had the professor was going to be gone. We had this opportunity to make hardware. We'd actually been working with several nonprofits that we were trying to partner to let them deploy Wi-Fi at like low-income housing and things like that. And we basically stitched all of these together. We ended up doing consulting on the side to be able to place the first order that we had, and then found a couple other interested customers that were willing to take the risk and put down the first orders for the hardware equipment.
So I have to interrupt, sorry. What you just described by getting customers to prepay for orders is exactly what Rob Ryan tells everyone to do, hands down. So I really need to connect you guys.
Yeah,
and I will.
that makes sense.
He's getting older, so I want to do it before he's no longer here. I should definitely connect you. Okay, so that happened. So the faculty advisor goes away. The Taiwan thing happens. That's 2. Then you still got 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, so we were doing consulting. We worked with, there's a group that needed some, we were working on wireless mesh stuff. We kind of were actually trying to see if we could embed that technology in other companies, like, because we wanted to see it have an impact. And so we were having a bunch of conversations. We ended up doing a bunch of consulting with other groups. One of the ones there was a one laptop per child project that we were trying to help out with at the same time. And we ended up doing some consulting for them. Then the other thing we ended up doing was, at the time, we actually ended up, Sanjit and I were talking to Google about sponsoring some of the work that we were doing, and they gave us intern offers. And so we actually talked to them and convinced them to let us do some contract work for them instead, so that they would essentially pay the company for the contract work instead of it going to us.
Gotcha, okay.
And so that was like the kind of like one of the 5th pieces. So we like stitched all these together, and our advisor was going to be gone. And we actually were like, well, let's do this for the summer, if that makes sense. At the end of the summer, if it doesn't work out, we'll just go back, we'll TA, and we'll see how stuff goes from there. So that was like our way of kind of de-risking the situation, if that makes sense. Because we were like, in the worst case, it doesn't work out, and we're back to kind of where we were.
It's kind of like what we always tell students, like start companies while you're students, because when they fail, you're still a student. That was sort of the same mentality.
Yeah.
Like if it fails, you're still
a student.
I mean, PhD student, I know it's a different level, but you're still a student.
Yeah, exactly. It felt like, I mean, it would, a little bit embarrassing. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, but that was like the worst case scenario for us, which actually felt like there wasn't a huge amount of downside at that time. So you might as well try.
And what happened after that summer at Google?
So at that point, we actually had gotten our first order in. It was like an incredible, difficult thing to actually get the hardware. We had to learn all about how do you manufacture these devices? How do you get them made? How do you flash the software? How do you do software releases? We had to stand up a website, just like all of the hard stuff when you first start a company. We put up a website. We started taking orders. And by the end of the summer, we were ready to place our second order. And so that was the big deal, because we could, essentially ship those out, see people using them. They got more interested, other folks interested. We had more orders. It kind of started the cycle, if that makes sense.
And this was all before you raised any venture dollars, right?
Yes.
So we'll get to that in a second, but And the financing was, you basically were self-financing.
right at that time, because we had no other option. Like,
Correct.
yeah,
Yep.
that's what it
Yeah,
was.
which is fantastic, which is probably why you were able to raise the venture dollars, actually.
Yeah, and yeah, I think so.
Okay, so, that was, so basically 2006?
Yeah, 2006,
6 years?
2007. Yeah.
Okay, and then the company started to scale for the next 6 years. You built it to become a much larger company. At the end of 6 years, just before Cisco bought it, how many people were at the company? Do you remember?
That's a good question. I somewhere between 500 and 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's it like to scale a company that quickly? And I'm sure it wasn't at the beginning. In years 1 and 2, it probably went from the 5 of you or 3 of you to 20. And then it probably really started to scale up after, I'm guessing 2004-ish or so, when things really started to move. What's it like to scale a company?
Yeah, it was super challenging, and I think starting a company is one of the most difficult things, just because like the default of inertia of everything is to do nothing, if that makes sense. So when you're starting a new company, like you're doing all this stuff for the first time, which is asking folks to change their behavior. Like you're going out, the number one thing you need to do is actually recruit a couple other people to work on the project with you. Like their default is to go continue whatever they're doing. They're probably going to tell you no. Like even the ones that will eventually come recruit are always going to say no at the beginning. And then once the employees tell you no, you're going to go out and pitch customers on the ideas, and they're going to say like, I don't need this, or why should I really buy this? So it's just constant no's the whole time. The other fascinating thing is once you get over that and you get the first yes, they come join you, and you just actually what you end up having to do as a startup founder is you move on to the next problem. And so every 6 months to a year, your job as a founder completely changes, right? Like the first 6 months, you're just trying to get the product out. You're trying to define what it is. Maybe if you're successful at that, then you get the opportunity to try to hire a couple more people to get them involved in your project. If you succeed at that, then all of a sudden you actually have a business that you need to like manage and understand. How do you release software? How do you do stuff? One of the like hardest things about being a founder is like every 6 months you're doing stuff for the first time and at a scale that you've never done before. So that just ends up being super challenging. One of the hardest things, and incredibly like a dynamic situation, because like every 6 months is a different one.
I mean, I'm asking this question for a reason. How would you describe yourself as a person?
A good. I think I love to learn about things, and I'm very curious. So I think one thing, especially as we started going through the scaling stuff, all of it was new, especially to me. And like one of the most challenging situations I think in the first like 6 months of the company was actually like we started the company and we recruited the smartest people we could possibly find in our lab to come work for it. And I think it's akin to all of a sudden, looking back, it's easier for me to reflect on this now. Like you go recruit the smartest people, and then you're by default their manager, if that makes sense, which is like a big responsibility and also an incredible challenge, right? Especially when you're having to make hard decisions and you're probably in an environment where you don't know how things are going to play out, or you've never managed folks before.
Yep.
So I think by nature, like when you're in these situations, it's an incredible stretch, like you're having to go through and like rethink, how to think about this problem, how to approach it. For me, I'm a little bit more of an academic person, if that makes sense. Like actually the easiest thing for me to do was be like, well, I haven't been in this situation before, but there are lots of people that have. Is it possible for me to learn their lessons without having to experience the same thing, if that makes sense? So
would you consider yourself to be extroverted, introverted, outgoing? I'm thinking more about the people side of the business.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You're scaling up, and like I'm guessing you probably don't consider yourself to be like extroverted in like the life of like go into a room and light it up. Like they're like
more of a
shy. I mean, okay,
absolutely.
So how do you do that? Like you're scaling a company, you're the CTO co-founder throughout the whole thing. You didn't hire your replacement ever. And yet you're dealing with all these people. Like, was that hard?
Yeah, it was,
For you
it was
personally?
definitely a huge challenge. You know, I mean, I love the tech side. I think the other thing though is that some of the stuff, you know, and I know like folks experience this in different aspects of their life. Like all of a sudden you're in and over time I've become more comfortable with this, being responsible for a larger company and the operations of it and everything. Like, it just becomes like something that you need to do, if that makes sense. And so I felt like there was a bunch of stuff. It's like, yeah, it wouldn't have been my like first choice to go out and focus on that, but it's always in service of some purpose, if that makes sense. And then like that makes it much easier for me to do something. If I understand, and you know, I think part of it is if I understand that there's some like reason that I'm doing something that's very difficult, I have a much easier time doing it than if I can't connect it back. I think the other thing that's made me much more of an empathetic leader is understanding that everyone works like that, if that makes sense. So if I can work with other folks to get them bought in on the vision and what we're trying to do and stuff like that, like, of course, we're going to change our tactics over time and like things like that. But that is a much more, I connect with that kind of those styles of leadership, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And it makes it much easier, I think, to do hard things. Because like, you know, starting a new company, doing something that like doesn't exist, it's by definition going to be difficult. Otherwise, someone else would have started a company.
Yeah.
Like,
And what is Sanjit like? Is he like you, or is he like, I'm trying to, you guys have now started another company, Samsara, we'll talk about that. Are you complementary?
yeah, it's a good question. So I think we are complementary in some ways. I spend a large amount of my time like working on innovation inside of the company. I have been through, you know, sometimes every 6 months the job changes depending on like what is going on. I think we share a lot of the same values, if that makes sense. And it was very interesting, like when I met him and first started working with him, there was a lot of stuff that you know, it's always hard to know where things will play out. I just feel so lucky to actually have been worked with him for like 20 years. But there are a lot of funny quirks about just working with other people for that long without stuff blowing up, right? Like,
well, I think there's probably a reason. I think you guys are probably really, really well matched.
yeah.
Like, does he like being the outside face of the company, that type of thing?
Yeah, and I mean, he definitely does that, and he's very good at it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there wasn't much tension. Oh, who's going to do that? Because he probably enjoyed it. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth because we never talked about this, but
yeah, no, absolutely. No, he's very good. If you guys met him or seen him
I never met him.
He's very thoughtful. I think we approach problems similarly. So there's a lot of stuff that we necessarily like haven't, you know, we don't have to like pre-game something beforehand. It's very likely we will come to the same conclusions about something. Certainly there are a bunch of aspects about like, what does it mean to work with other people for such an extended period of time without things blowing up? Like one joke I have, and these are the things that like, I've never talked about with Sanjit, if that makes sense. I mean, I've worked for you for 20 years. Like I know him very well and stuff like that, but I will be honest, we do not and will not play competitive games against each other. So like I can tell you
what type of games are you talking about?
well it's like, so I mean, and most entrepreneurs are extremely competitive people, and I would classify myself, I'm an extremely competitive person, like if it comes down to it, and I'm sure people can like relate to this, right? But so and it's even stuff like, hey, if like we go I wouldn't have a good example, but like, oh yeah, you play table tennis or something, you're gonna get into it, right? Like you're gonna be really excited about it. I can tell you the last time I played a game like that with Sanjit, and it was like in it's 2025 now. I think it was 2014. I played tennis once
with him.
And I like, maybe I have either blanked it out or can't remember who won. But that's the last time I've done something like that. It's like, you know, normally other folks, I'm like, yeah, but dude, absolutely. Let's like, you know, play some game, or, you know, with my kids, or hang out with other people and doing stuff like that. But I think like, you know, over time you actually like understand like how to work really well with someone and like what are the boundaries on like.
So I have a question for the audience. There's two other entrepreneurs from Cornell that you and Sanjit really, I know he didn't go to Cornell, but you really remind me of these two who did go to Cornell. The Wayfair guys. It's like, so the founders of Wayfair, do you know Neeraj?
Yeah, I've met them more.
Like you're them. You know, I mean, truly, and they've been together forever, longer than you guys have been together, because they graduated in 95. Wait, no, they started in 95. So they've been together for a long time doing business, and I think it's because you're super complementary, and you minimize your tension. I'm just realizing that now. Again, we never talked about it before.
No, yeah,
So
absolutely. yeah.
I think it's great. So pick your co-founders wisely, obviously. Minimize conflicts. It always helps. I mean, you should start playing pickleball, by the way.
Right.
I started it last year. It's unbelievable. Okay, so you end up selling Meraki to Cisco for 1.2 billion. Can you explain how it happened?
Yeah, I
They're
think,
scaling, and Cisco is like, wow, what's going on here?
yeah, we were at kind of on pace, and we started with Wi-Fi, and we were developing the Wi-Fi system I talked about, and then I think we were, and myself, I was a networking engineer, as we were building these Wi-Fi systems, and I had like this, and I think we all of us working on this, myself, Sanjit, and our other co-founder Hans, like we had a vision for networking that would, we started with access point, and when you think about it, an access point, it's serving a bunch of clients. And there's one back there on the wall, that's what I'm looking at them. And like after, when you work on these systems for 10 years, you just like know like where to look, if that makes sense, like where they're all deployed. Like that access point back there, there's some wire behind it. It's actually plugged into a switch at the other end, and it's providing both power and network connectivity to it. The fascinating thing is once you've gone through all the work to make a Wi-Fi access point work, kind of like a switch, it's just wireless too, if that makes sense. Like the switch is just the hardware version of it. And so we were like, well, we should, obviously, if we've done 80% of the work, we should do that last 20% and then make switches, because everybody that's buying access points also needs switches. So we started expanding in concentric circles, and that was like our pattern kind of for innovation, because like to do that second product wasn't nearly as much work as to do the first one. It was still a ton of work. And we had expanded, basically we did that, and we just ran that playbook over and over and over again. We did Wi-Fi, we did switches, we built routers, and everything you would need to deploy a network. And we were doubling our revenue about every year, and we were kind of gearing up to go public. And that's when Cisco started to approach us. We were about to that point and kind of operating at scale. And, it ended up being a great home for the technology. And today, if you buy an access point from Cisco, you're buying the Meraki stuff. At the time we got acquired, we were probably doing, I think, $150 million of revenue. Today, inside of Cisco, they do about $8 billion. Are on track to do that sometime, with this year or next year. I'm not exactly sure, but it was an amazing place, and especially as an entrepreneur that's like super focused on impact, like it was what an amazing outcome. A great acquisition.
Absolutely. So I'm going to skip around a little bit on our prepared questions. So the VCs that you guys had at Meraki were?
Yeah, we worked with Doug Leone and Jim Getz at Sequoia, which were like really amazing partners.
So Doug's a Cornellian also. Yeah. So probably the top firm in the world, Sequoia. Were they helpful with the Cisco transaction? I know they know Cisco because they invested in Cisco.
Yeah, back in the day.
Back in the day when they hired the founders of Cisco. Like, did Sequoia push you to sell?
No, they didn't push us though. I mean, ultimately they actually, and Doug specifically, I think he left it up to us. Yeah. He was kind of like, you guys call. I think at that time, it's always like an incredibly difficult decision to figure out what to do. And I think also acknowledging that like good acquisitions, like they don't come around,
right,
so often. We were really thinking about taking the company public. We had the company had hired at that time CFO with public company experience, and we're really gearing up for that way. So this was really like it was a sudden shift, if that makes sense. But just ended up overall felt like we were getting forward credit for it. It was like it still would have taken us a little bit of time because we think we wouldn't, And knowing, I mean, Cisco has an amazing brand, right? Like if you're going to buy an access point or you're doing something, they're the default answer. So that's why it also felt like it was a great home for the technology and all, and the outcome for the people involved, like all the people at the company was incredible.
Right. So I mean, it's like I'm not trying to make light, or I'm making light of this. It's like 1.2 billion. The company was relatively small. I mean, 500 to 1,000 people. It's not huge, but it's a good sized tech company.
Yeah. And
it's going to make an incredible impact on a lot of people, not just the founders. To me, it's a pretty easy decision. I mean, if you're looking back, it's like, because being a public company is a pain in the ass, and you probably know that now from Samsara, right? It's not that easy being a public company all the time. And the exit when it comes like that, it's pretty exciting. So you guys, I'm assuming you were, after you processed it, were very happy with the outcome.
Yeah, we were, and I spent a couple years there, after the company was acquired, and really what we ended up doing was making the company successful and a larger company. Like we had to figure out, and it was a different type of entrepreneurial journey, like how to engage like the larger company, get everybody incented around buying into the product and stuff like that. And it went well, and I think the other thing we're really proud of is we actually just had other leaders that we had brought into the company that were able to take over our roles, if that makes sense. And it's continued to scale, and so that like honestly, seeing folks like that be successful is really gratifying, knowing that we got the chance.
Did both of your other Meraki co-founders also work at Cisco after the acquisition?
Yeah, and there were three of us, myself, Sanjit, and Hans, and we all stayed for about 2 years to make sure it was, and we like really kind of like really turned our focus on making the company successful inside, and I think we're really proud of it.
Yeah. And then you and Sanjit decided to start the next company.
That's right.
Did you think about it while you were at Cisco, or like what prompted you to start Samsara?
Yeah, definitely. So towards the end, we were deploying a lot of Wi-Fi systems. I'll be honest, like if you go to a building like this, then you look at those access points that are up on the wall, and you go trace that wire back. There's a closet. And so, I would do a lot of customer visits where you go out and visit them. And I will be honest, probably after the 50th data closet I saw, they all look the same. If that makes sense. Towards the end of Meraki, we started to see Wi-Fi be deployed in warehouses. Other interesting spots that we started to refer to as physical operations. So as warehouses, manufacturing facilities, we saw people deploying Wi-Fi in water treatment facilities and stuff like that to get sensor readings off of stuff. And that looked different because when you show up to those customer sites, there's not a data closet. It's not a building like this. And for me, actually, it resonated a lot. Like, thinking back to, I was from Oklahoma. I was, thinking about ranching and farming and stuff like that. It felt like I was like, I want to do something in that space. At the same time, I think we started to see a couple other trends, and Sanjit and I are very academic people. We had all of these plots, if we rewind back then, to like cellular connectivity, battery life on sensors. We were looking at the beginnings of the AI transformation that was going on with GPUs and stuff like that, and seeing that the compute that was going into these devices felt like it was exponentially increasing. So we were connecting that with what was going on when we visited those places, like the folks that were working out in operations, and those people were starting to use technology right at the beginning. Like they were all using Facebook at the time. They were using a lot of other online tools. But if you looked at what they were using for their jobs, they were not using technology. They were still using paper. In fact, if they had people out in the field on stuff, they were keeping track of them with pens on a corkboard. They weren't using, but this is the time where it's like Uber and Lyft existed. You could call a cab and they could see where the cab was on their phone. So I think that was the moment we had an aha, and this was after we had left the company, and we matched these trends with a change in sentiment of technology, especially among the folks that were running those operations. And I think it kind of felt like there was going to be a big transformation wave. And I think that was the moment we were like a little bit like, well, we had been through this. We'd seen the same transformation with Wi-Fi, how that like went from something that was like nobody was using it, all of a sudden everybody needs it. And that was the moment where we kind of were like, you felt like you had a little insight, and we were like, the world is going to change, and you feel like you see where it's going. And then I think that was the moment it was like, well, do you want to sit this one out, or do you want to get back in and do it? So that was kind of, this was like a month-long process of going through and really trying to refine this, but that was kind of the hypothesis.
Like, did you guys sit down at a table and talk about what you wanted to start and what it might do?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like, and I've told this to other folks when they ask, it's like, so I had such a transformational experience, just like life experience with Meraki. And, I think your question earlier was, where does the name come from for Samsara? What ended up happening is, like, after we left Meraki, I had a really hard time with it, and didn't know what to do. One is I had recruited literally every person that I could possibly recruit to Meraki, right? Like, and over a period of like 6 or 7 years. So all the folks that I knew were there. if that makes sense,
Yeah.
that I could possibly like get involved in the product. You know, we had been working on stuff and the subject matter was something that I was like, I felt like I had real expertise built up. So that was really hard just to like leave it, you know, behind. But at the same time, it's like I knew there were other people that could take over those roles. And so it was just a real bittersweet, you know, kind of moment for me, which sounds totally ridiculous. I realize.
It actually doesn't. I mean,
but-
it almost sounds lonely.
Well, yeah.
Like
Well,
you leave and then all
I
your
know,
friends
yeah.
are still there and
Well, and I left, and it was honestly like my wife was, she is a scientist, she's an epidemiologist, and so she was finishing her PhD at the time. And so I was like, hey, you know, I come home after, you know, even after work, I was like, great, let's go to dinner and do something, you know, fun this weekend. And she was like, I have to finish my thesis, like, you know, so she didn't have it. So as a result, I would call Sanjit up and be like, let's get brunch. And so we started talking about all this stuff, and that's where a lot of the stuff kind of came together. And part of the reason we ended up starting the company was we felt like we had this real opportunity. We felt like we saw things were going to change. And then I think at the same time, we had just been through this like really incredible experience with Meraki. And it was one of those things, you know, some other folks describe the entrepreneurial journey as like eating glass. Like that's one of the phrases that I'm sure folks have heard that. And like, it is absolutely true. Like it is so hard, and there are so, and I think part of what we were going through at the end of this was like, we knew and had very vivid details about how hard it is. And I think knowing all that, and we had a bunch of candid conversations at the beginning, it kind of goes back to your like, how do you find a co-founder and someone you can reason through about all this stuff was, you know, we had to have very hard conversations about like, well, what does this mean for you? Like, imagine we start another company, especially, you know, it's a vulnerable moment, right? Like we had felt like we had, you know, been successful with Meraki, but to go back out and like maybe fail again was like a little bit like risky, maybe only from an ego perspective. If
right.
that makes
But I
sense.
mean,
But
look, I'm assuming financially you didn't need to start another company. I mean, you had done
yeah, well,
well.
and I think this is the other thing, and why like I'm so passionate about entrepreneurship, if that makes sense. Like we had gone through that period, and like seeing, like you said, like all of the things that, you know, we felt like we had participated in the technological like advancement of Wi-Fi, you know, to some level. All the people, there were so many folks at the company that did well, you know, from the company, and even today, like a couple weeks ago, I had a couple of we had an engineer that started at Meraki in technical support and emailed me, you know, and I hadn't been in contact with him for 3 or 4 years, but it was like the jumpstart of his career, if that makes sense, for getting a chance to move from customer support over to engineer. And now he's a staff engineer at a major tech company. And he just sent me a note. He was like, hey, just want to let you know, thanks for taking a chance on me, like back in the day. And like the guy, like he was amazing, incredible worker, right? Like sees the opportunity, and you know, to be a part of that and just to see all the secondary benefits of like if a company ends up working all the people that can benefit is very meaningful. And so I think, you know, for us, we kind of got to the point, and that's actually why we ended up the word Samsara, you know, it's a Sanskrit word. We had been focused, and we had a list of these words that were untranslatable or didn't have a direct translation from other languages. One of the ones we were looking at was that one, and we kind of looked at the Meraki experience, and we're like, look, we know how hard it was. We know what we're signing up for, and even if we were going to do something, it might not be successful for years, if it's successful at all, you know, and we might work on something for 4 or 5 years, and it may just not work out and not be worth it. But we signed up, we were like, we feel almost compelled to go do it again and try. And so that was a little bit where
what does samsara mean?
It is the process of that rebirth,
Okay.
if that makes sense, of being like kind of reincarnated. It doesn't necessarily have, and there are both positive connotations and negative connotations about like, you know, going through that process and kind of like understanding, you know, the suffering behind it, if that makes sense. But it was a little like acknowledgement of like, hey, we're very kind of process driven is almost the wrong word, but it was like that was a real journey we were
Okay.
going through for the second
So that was 2015 when you started?
Yes, that's right.
About?
Yep.
And when did you raise your first venture dollars for that company? What year?
Yeah, that's good. I think we raised it late in 2015, and the you know, obviously as a entrepreneur in your second company, you have a very different set of challenges than your first. Like, you know, it was much easier for us to raise money.
Yep.
If that makes sense. But there were a lot of aspects where it was, you know, what we knew going in that was going to be the case. What we couldn't do, and we were very careful about this and very thoughtful about it, was like, we wanted to find customer traction very quickly to make sure that we were actually onto stuff. So we spent a huge amount of time actually going, searching out customers, talking to them, trying to pitch them, but making sure that we were actually selling to customers that we didn't know before, because we thought, as a successful entrepreneur, like, people might feel like they're doing you a favor, if that makes sense. But we felt like if we just called a random company and tried to sell them, if we could convince them and they didn't know who we are, we would be onto something and wouldn't fool ourselves. So that was really important for us during that.
Yeah.
During that.
And who did you raise funds from?
The second time we raised funds from Andreessen Horowitz, so Mark Andreessen there, and then ended up also raising from General Catalyst and Hamant. Both of those guys were fantastic partners, and we had actually ended up working with them and getting introduced to them through some other companies that we were working with at Meraki.
I'm curious, did Sequoia want to get into your round?
They did, and we talked with them quite a bit. I mean, I think it's one of these things, like, sometimes things work out in business and sometimes they don't, but certainly, I mean, I'm definitely in contact with a bunch of the Sequoia folks, and they've been very helpful over the years.
So, and Mark Andreessen is still on your board?
He's still on our board.
Still on the board. So a lot of you know this, but in short, they've raised money from the 3 of the top 5 firms probably in the world. That's pretty incredible. And I know it's easier to raise the second time. They're probably just waiting for you to start something new, right? I mean, it's like, oh God, these guys because you're still relatively young at that time, right?
Yeah.
And it was like you weren't tired. You didn't. I mean, maybe you were tired, but you still had a lot of gas in your tank.
That's right. Yeah.
And you're willing to take another risk. So when you go onto the Samsara website, which I actually did this morning, because I needed to refresh my little brain, and it just, one of the main themes is digitizing the operations world. So just explain what this means for
absolutely.
the audience.
So to give some kind of perspective, the customers that we serve are like the largest physical operations companies in the US. So this would be everything from folks that are in transportation, long haul trucking. It might be other field services companies that are going out and doing work remotely at places. It's also construction and things like this. We have a series of products that help with both efficiency and safety, are the 2 main themes that we develop. So on both of those fronts, we have a telematics device that usually gets installed in vehicles. We pull all the sensor readings out of the vehicles and then do a bunch of analysis on that. So if you have 1,000 or 2,000 vehicles, you probably have a lot of folks that are driving these. We help you do safety programs to drive down accidents. So this is like an AI dash cam that sits in the cab and helps record accidents if they happen. And then ultimately we run all the workflows that let folks drive down their accident rates at larger companies. And then we also help with efficiency programs. So if you're a large company, you have a couple thousand drivers, your fuel bills are usually very considerable. And so if you have a program where you're reminding people about don't leave the vehicles that idle, you can actually save a ton of money at scale doing those things. So those are the type of, we usually focus on safety and efficiency for these folks, and working on, especially with larger companies that have vehicle footprint.
And Samsara is public. You went public during the pandemic boom, right? In December 2021, so a very high point in most stock market indexes. What are your revenues now?
And these are all public,
right,
so you
so
can
say
look them up. Yeah, we crossed over. We had a big milestone last year. We crossed over $1 billion in ARR. So that was huge for us, and we felt like a big accomplishment. We believe we're on a significant portion of the commercial vehicles in the U.S. Somewhere between probably 5 and 10% have one of our telematics or dashcam devices in them. And then we have another series of products like this that are doing asset tracking and things like that. So these are like tools that might be critical. Like if you're showing up to a construction job site, you're probably bringing a lot of other tools along. We actually make small industrial grade trackers to make sure that those like devices show up on time, and then folks can do similar type of efficiency analysis with these.
Excellent. So we only have about 10 minutes left. I'm sure there's some questions. I have more, but I just realized we only have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So audience questions? Yes, start here. Oh, got to go to the mic.
how do you know when something that's new technology, a new product is really ready to go and has all the things that you need for it to be, robust in its environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one, I feel like it's like I spend all my time trying to hone that craft, right, of figuring that out. I think the biggest thing is there are technology adoption curves, right, that I think have been kind of started to be pretty well understood on how they do it, ranging from like early adopters using stuff and use cases that haven't been proved out. And then as like those get proved out, it moves to, the majority of folks. And then, towards the tail end, you start to see the kind of what I would describe as like technology laggards end up embracing technology once it's been fully de-risked. Most technologies go through those cycles. So it's really interesting to see the early adoption use cases, I feel like are very out in the field. People are using these new technologies in spite of them being unproven. And they're usually glimmers of what the main use cases are when it moves into the kind of majority of people. The fascinating thing I think that has been going on though in the last like 5 to 10 years is the new companies, especially with a lot of the AI tools and things coming out, it is getting super compressed. And I think one of the reasons I think I've been more excited in the last year about building new products and stuff like that, just because there is a whole set of toolboxes that's available to product builders now that just didn't even exist even 2 years ago. So I think, as these like new technology waves come out, everything seems to have been getting compressed an awful lot, which I think is an interesting opportunity, right? And it means that like, that there's just a lot more possibilities out there, and actually getting out, talking to customers, seeing how they use stuff, seeing what they're willing to tolerate, in terms of something working or something being reliable, ends up being super valuable.
Hi, John. My name is Sanvi. I'm a freshman here studying computer science and operations research. And one question I had for you was kind of going back into the founding stages. I mean, you and Sanjay were friends. How'd you kind of go about the founding agreement and making sure you're able to kind of allocate, those responsibilities? What were some specific factors that you took in your first company, and how has that changed to the second?
Yeah, definitely a good question. I think in the first time, everything is like brand new. So a lot of this stuff, especially in the first 6 months of the company, is just like trying to divvy stuff up, and it's almost like project divvying up, right? Like, and I remember between the two or three of us that were founding the company, like we just were like, well, at that time I was working on a lot of the software pieces anyway, so like those made most sense to do. Another one of our founders, kind of had plenty of experience and had understood like actually how to go get a lease done, and like that's a project in itself, right? And then we had to incorporate, and so it was just a little bit more of divide and conquer on those along those pieces, a little bit more tactical. I think the second time around, the way I would describe it is we had a high level map, but of what needed to be done, if that makes sense. But we didn't know actually once we started on the trail how to get there and navigate through it. So that was a little bit of a different challenge. But there, I think we already kind of understood, how we would work together and what we would do. So it was a little bit different. But I think especially the first like 6 months of the first company were much more tactical, if that makes sense, and it was a little bit less strategic, which I think makes sense, right? Like in some ways, a lot of the roles actually the first 6 months, second 6 months, next year, the company, depending on where things are going, like you're going to need to spend you have to build a product first, and then you probably need to fundraise, right? And then stuff like that, if that's an issue, and each one of those might be a different person, depending on just how you do stuff.
So related to that, I mean, did Sanjit take the CEO role by default? Like, did you and Hans both think like, oh, this just makes sense, or was there any debate over that?
Yes, I mean certainly, and I'm trying to remember exactly how some of the stuff played out. I mean, I think it was certainly there was back and forth, right? Like you have to actually sit down and like hash it out and figure it out. I think in those early days, and even going through when you're doing fundraising, like there's a lot of stuff that goes into fundraising, like actually even deciding, kind of like you were alluding to too, who do you work with from a board perspective? And I think one of the things that's like a little bit underappreciated is there is a lot of like weight placed into who is the CEO and the others, like when you're starting a company. And it is true, you need to work through those. The reason people, and I think you'll hear this from a lot of some VCs use it as a signal. They're like, if you can't figure that out, and the real reason is because like even once you get it figured out and you're like, okay, well, we have a rough arrangement for how this is going to work out for the next like year or two. Then all of a sudden, when you do fundraising, you're actually having to make a decision. You have the initial company, you probably had a board compensation. You're trying to understand who are you going to invite to join your board, if that makes sense. That, and kind of to your point earlier, like we worked with Doug Leone. We got for Meraki, we were incredibly fortunate to partner with him. That in itself was a 10-year partnership. It was a very serious, like, commitment, if that makes sense, like, because like that's how long you're going. And we knew that for our second company too, that like that is a really critical decision. It's actually the same kind of thought process of like, well, what kind of person do you want? What kind of expertise do you want to bring into the company? If you're have a lot of tech experience, do you want someone with sales experience that might help, identify and help you get to that first stage of sales leaders and bring those into the company? There's a lot of decisions, and I'd say like, that trying to figure out what the roles are going to be in the company, like, you're going to have to kind of turn around that and actually do the same thing for, who to hire, who to get involved when you're doing fundraising, what the first executives you hire. Because, and I will say, like, I know we talked a lot about just myself and Sanjit, like if you're successful and you're scaling a company, you have to bring in other leaders to work with. And that's the same question, like what kind of folks do you want to work with? What kind of experience should they have a background? How are you going to divide stuff up with them? They're all actually very similar problems in a sense. So I think that's why it's a really difficult problem to work through. And unfortunately, you're going to face it, repeatedly.
Who else? Go ahead, Hank.
Hey, John, thank you so much for coming. My name's Adam. I'm a senior here at Cornell. My question is about corporate development. So as someone who has been a founder multiple times, how do you approach, now that you're at a publicly traded company, when to build versus when to buy?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think it is highly dependent on like the individual company, the market, what the other, whether companies even exist that you could, kind of purchase and integrate in. I'd say, at our company, we're not religious one way or the other about build versus buy on some of this stuff, and some of it comes up to practical matters. I think what we have seen, I think Samsara was very early on to the industry that we're kind of serving. There haven't been traditionally a lot of companies in our space, if that makes sense, and other startups that are there. What we have seen in the last like year to two is things have been changing a lot. There are a lot of new companies like that are in kind of the operation space, which has been super cool to see, and something that's definitely been changing over time. I think the technology space changes so fast, especially it seems to have been accelerating. I think, and it is interesting to go through and study a lot of companies because there are formative acquisitions at a lot of them. If you look at even the larger companies like Google and stuff like that, they made a lot of key acquisitions relatively early on that helped kind of expand their product line. But some of it's just kind of situational dependent, and it's really tricky to figure out. Good question.
Okay, one final question.
I'm sure Cisco is very happy they had you as an intern. I'm curious why you left Cisco. Sounds like it was going really, really well.
Wait.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you mean after the company had been acquired?
Yeah, after it was acquired.
I think I don't have a great answer. I think it was one of those things. I think I just like felt like I had run the playbook out. And at the time, as in, we worked on all these networking applications and kind of got to the end on what, we felt like we had a vision for the roadmap. And just wanted to see what else was out there, if that makes sense. And, I think at that time, we didn't know when we left, we didn't have plans to start another company. I looked at a lot of things and I went through a pretty hard process about understanding actually what we ended up doing. I went back and thought about going back to academics. we actually wrote an academic paper on a lot of the data analysis that we had access to as part of Meraki of running a larger organization, and how, you know, network traffic was changing over time and a lot of stuff like that. But I will be honest, it reminded me that I didn't really like writing papers. And so I took that as a hint that maybe that, like, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I didn't like about academic research. I love the research part and I love writing code. So this was the process we went through about, you know, so I think I couldn't quite do that process while feel like you're, you know, when you're at a company, you're like engaged full time at it. Like it requires all of your mental acumen, like trying to sit there and figure out like how to get to the next level for whatever the company's goals were. So I think we needed some of that time to explore and figure out what.
So do you think the company you're doing now is it for your career, or you think you'll have to do it again?
I have like 10 more ideas I want to do. You know, inside of Samsara, that's like what's going on. So we're certainly, and I will use this as a plug for, like, we're doing a bunch of really interesting stuff, you know, especially at the edge of like hardware and software and AI and a bunch of cool stuff there. So we're definitely looking for other, like more folks to help us scale and like work on every, you know, application. Cause I think we have a pretty broad vision for stuff, you know, that we're working on and have a really interesting market, have a lot of really interesting customers now. And it's something that's changed as we develop. I mean, now we have a substantial footprint and it's super cool to just be able to, you know, one thing that is very hard when you're a new company starting out is like you don't have customers that you can just call on the phone, and now we have access to a ton of them. They're really great partners to work with. They give us great ideas. I mean, I wish I was coming up with the ideas for everything to do, but most of the time it's actually me like getting out, talking to a customer and getting feedback from them and them being like, hey, can you do this? You know, can you think about integrating this into your product? And it's a great source of ideas, like, you know, and it's much easier than racking my brain about coming up with new ideas. So I'm excited about that. And that's you know, part of our vision for the company.
Great. So we are at time. I've so enjoyed this. I know the audience has. Thank you so much for coming back to campus. Congratulations. And I hope we have more dialogue in the future.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay,
Well, thanks
thank you.
everybody.